Welcome to Mindfulness Manufacturing. My name is Trevor Blondeel. Spending 25 years in manufacturing, I discovered the real impact we have on turnover, communication, and the ability to manage change is how we show up. That's the essence of emotional intelligence. In each episode, we bring a guest or message to expand your skills, engage your people, and grow your organization. So let's jump in. In manufacturing, we do have to conquer mountains, which it feels like on a daily basis. It feels like the same mountain because we're going through some of the same problems, but it's a different one every day. And on this podcast, we like to bring in amazing people that have done things that are just different in different ways to give us new perspectives to handle our own challenges. And my friend, Steven Pivnik, he grew his company Binary Tree to over 200 employees over 12 countries and successfully sold this to a $4 billion competitor and somehow tied this into an Ironman competition, all around mindset. Welcome, Steven.
Hey, Trevor. Thank you very much for having me.
So how does the Ironman, because you're one of the first Ironman that I've met, tie into this amazing software company, which you manufactured software? You know what this is like and
Right.
how this intertwines every day. How do these two tie in together for you?
So when I first learned about triathlon, so Ironman is one of the longest triathlons out there. When I first learned about it and started training for this grueling event, an Ironman is a 2.4-mile swim, a 112-mile bike, and a 26-mile run, all done back to back to back on a single day with a 17-hour cutoff. So when I first learned about this event and I started training for it, I realized that being an entrepreneur, I realized that there's a lot of similarities between endurance sports, triathlons, and entrepreneurship. They both require a lot of planning, a lot of preparation, execution of those plans, endurance, against those plans. And then you're gonna uncover setbacks. So you're gonna need to pivot. You're gonna need to make adjustments, throughout the course of, executing on the plan. And it's gonna require a lot of endurance to get to that proverbial finish line, whether it's the actual finish line of a race or the finish of a business, where in most entrepreneurs' minds, it's the actual sale or the IPO of that business. So the similarities were just uncanny. And as I started executing on one, I started getting better at the other.
And you had the business rolling when you started even thinking about the Ironman?
Yeah, the business was rolling. I consider the Ironman and my endurance addiction my midlife crisis. I was turning 40, and I felt that based on my family lineage and family tree, there was just a lot of bad genes inside of me brewing. My parents and my grandparents, they had it all from, cancer to diabetes, high blood pressure, cholesterol, you name it, they had it. God bless them. So I figured, and most of these diseases were hereditary. So that means that those genes are in me somewhere, that, I was going to get into my 40s in the best shape possible. And endurance sports is the vehicle that I chose to get there.
So yeah, instead of just getting a gym membership, you just went all in. Were you like physically active a lot before you started doing this in your 40s?
I mean, my family hates it when I say that I was a couch potato, but I was a couch potato. I mean, I was relatively active. Skiing was my thing. And that's probably the only sport that I participated in. I rode my bicycle a lot as a teenager, but that's about it. I never participated in any sort of, team sport or athletic event. So I like you said, thinking back at it, yeah, a gym membership would have been really easy, but I chose to do 140-mile races instead.
Yeah, not such a great story as that I started to go to the gym. That's kind of my story in my 40s. I got committed to that. Nothing close to an Ironman. And so you kind of, because you obviously were working so many hours, right, to build a company like this, to be working with companies like IBM and Microsoft and being a player in that field. So then, you go through that grind and you're probably spending a lot of time on the computer, a lot of work with interaction, but then you grow to 200 people. So that just did that kind of blow up on you, or was that just over the years, or how did?
Yeah, it was definitely over the years. I mean, it was gradual. I mean, we didn't go through the typical, hockey stick growth like, most IT companies and in the .com error, went through. So it was a gradual growth. I had the company for 26 years. Coincidentally, a marathon is 26 miles. I had the company for 26 years. That was not strategic. That was just a complete coincidence. So we just became more and more successful year after year and continued to bring on staff. And, with that growth came bringing on, executive leadership, management teams. And thank God, there's no way any one human can handle, more than a dozen reports, I don't think. So it was the proper management team structure that allowed us to really scale to those numbers of employees.
What really intrigued me was when I read your book, which is Built to Finish, is that you had a chapter called Mind the Shortcuts. And I was like, oh, I got to have Steven on the podcast. That's a lesson that he needs to share. So what are the shortcuts we need to mind, Steven?
There was many shortcuts that I can discuss from my perspective. The biggest one that comes to mind is from the hiring process. When a position became available and we needed to fill it really quickly, when we did our due diligence and really interviewed many candidates and then picked the best ones, those were the best that's the best type of scenario and the best possible outcome. But when you really rush the hiring process and you take a shortcut and you hire one of the first one or the first, or the second person that interviews for the role, that in hindsight, that was always a recipe for disaster because we didn't do our due diligence. That individual really didn't last because we really didn't, put him or her through the necessary process. So hiring is one where, shortcuts, they feel good in the beginning, but they typically don't last. In the software development space, again, we're manufacturing software, right? We're writing code and we're putting products out. And sometimes you really just want to get a product out the door. Either a customer is yelling at you and they want it. The market is screaming and they need a specific solution and you feel you need to get something out so that you can get a competitive advantage over others. When you rush something out the door and bring it to market, without going through the right process, without going through the proper quality assurance process, the right testing process, the right load balancing process, et cetera. Just as I'm sure if you're manufacturing, something material, there's a whole bunch of, checks and balances that you need to go through before you put this item on the shelf. For whatever reason, when you bypass some of those processes and you put the item on the shelf, it's inevitable. You're asking for problems down the line.
That strikes my heart because, even in manufacturing, when we want to I had even just my own coaching, I had a vice president say, well, can you just, review this with our leaders in an hour instead of 2? And I'm like, no, like that defeats the whole purpose.
Right.
It's like, we're not trying to get it out the door. We're trying to transform a mindset, right? You can't can you just cut the development time down in half? Like, it's like, no, it's because we have a process that's proven that will be successful if you take a little bit of time. Because one of my favorite quotes out of your book is, many people subscribe to the false notion that there is always time to do something twice, but there's rarely time to do it right the first time.
Yeah, I love that saying because there's always so many different pressures, right? There's, like I said, there's pressures from the market. There's pressures from customers. There's sometimes, internal pressures because, there's a bonus at stake to make a specific deadline and the list goes on and on and on. And I can't tell you the amount of times, when mistakes inevitably get made when you rush something and then you're going to have to redo it. It's inevitable, but these mistakes unfortunately are repeated time and time again.
And so what's the shortcuts in the Ironman?
The shortcuts in Ironman.
or it's the whole point that there is no shortcuts to training for an Ironman.
The shortcuts are basically not training enough, right? So there's a tried and true method of the amount of hours that need to be put in and the distances you need to cover to get your body both physically and mentally ready for such an enduring and grueling event. Right. So, and I've been guilty of it. I've taken shortcuts. There were some races where, I felt that, Mike, I'm good enough, or I'm strong enough, or I have enough foundation in me where I don't need to put in the 15 to 20 hours a week that it takes, to get to this specific race. So I've taken those shortcuts many times and boy, have I paid for it on the race course because when you're not mentally and physically, prepared for such an enduring event, it's going to hurt. I got to the finish line. But boy, was I in a lot of pain.
And I've read David Goggins, a lot of his work, and he would talk about just doing 100 miles and not even training for it. But then when you really read into it, like the guys, like he talks about toenails falling off and just like the body just totally broken down after. Is that the biggest difference? Like if you don't take the shortcuts, then you have a better recovery time?
One of the many benefits of not taking shortcuts is the recovery time. Again, mindset is a huge, huge part of endurance racing, right? So it's the mind that's going to carry the body, and the mind will your body to do things that you didn't think that were humanly possible, but your body will pay the price for it afterwards. So if you don't train properly, you can probably still get to the finish line, but boy,
Mm,
your recovery be longer. Instead of, a couple of 3 days to recover from a race like that, it'll take over a week. And you may do some longer term damage to yourself. So taking those
mm.
shortcuts is really going to be painful in the long run.
Sounds like running a manufacturing plant, right? It's going to hurt you in the long run, right?
Yeah, yeah,
It's
totally.
it's focusing on this hours, production target or the day or the quarter instead of like, it's the whole mindfulness manufacturing. It's like, okay, so is this the right decision for the long term, right?
Right.
Or is it just the right decision because it's a good shortcut and we can just get this done?
Yeah, I mean, you're burying an inevitable landmine, which will blow up in some way, shape, or form down the road.
I was thinking about the whole dashboards in business and Peter Drucker and then you had this phrase, do I say it right? Pole pole?
Pole pole.
Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so pole pole is Swahili for slowly, slowly. When I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro in Africa, right outside I think it's yeah in Tanzania, Africa. When you're in a mountain, you really want to get to the top as fast as possible. You're just you've been training forever.
Yeah.
You flew halfway around the world. You're finally there at base camp, and you're starting to head up. Well, if you go too fast, especially when you go too fast at high altitudes, your body is not going to appreciate it. And you're basically talking about a shortcut. You're basically asking for a serious, potentially life-threatening illness if you go too fast. So the
Mm.
guides there, and there's always guides, right? So there's a lot of porters on every single expedition team. They keep reminding every single climber, pole, pole, slowly, slowly. They want to make sure that you ascend the mountain as slowly as possible in order to give your body the best chance of success. So the body needs to build up red blood cells in order to
Mm.
be able to breathe at higher and higher altitudes. And if you go too fast, you're not giving your body the ability to do that, and you're going to get water in your lungs. And then you'll end up with pulmonary edema, which is basically a recipe for disaster and potential death. So the one phrase we heard repeatedly over the 2 week expedition was pole, pole. Like, slow down, guys.
And yeah, because we had a previous guest on here, one of my past mentors and current mentor, I guess, Horst Prelog, and his saying would be, "You got to go slow to go fast." And he grew the company very quickly, but there were certain decisions that he would push that we gotta go a little slower here so we don't
Mhm.
miss something. And it's like when you slow down, you can see things more clearly and maybe just like whether you're climbing a mountain or whether it's just that day to day, right? And that's what the listener can take away listening, driving to work right now is where do I need to slow down so that we can execute quickly?
Yeah, 100%. I
And I
mean,
think,
the old story about the two guys chopping wood, comes to mind where there's a competition and there's two guys, whoever chops down the most amount of trees in a day wins. So they both going at it, and all of a sudden one of them stops to sharpen his axe. So the other guy continues chopping, thinking, "Oh, what a fool! He's slowing down. He's going to sharpen his axe. I can get three new trees cut down while he sharpens his axe." Well, guess what? The guy with the sharp axe, comes back at it with a vengeance, and he surpasses the quantity of trees that he can cut down because he slowed down multiple times to sharpen his axe. So it's a super old story, but I love that. And it holds true in so many different industries right now.
It does, and it does make me think about some of your lessons in the book of there's not shortcuts when it comes to connecting with your people, and it's like I think of the sharpening the axe is sometimes just a deeper conversation with someone, whatever that topic may be is kind of like are we slowing down enough just to have that conversation, and that could be the sharpening of the axe.
100%. Yeah, on the people front, I hate the saying, quality time versus quantity. Sure, in a lot of aspects of life, you can have some quality time doing things, but when it comes to relationships, quantity, I think, supersedes quality. You just need, and especially with kids, I look back at
Mm,
raising my two daughters. I wish I had more time. I was, crazy busy, building my company. Um,
hmm.
but I'm making up for it now with a lot of, long trips and, board games and other
Oh,
adventures
nice.
that we take. So yeah, it was definitely, I was fooling myself into thinking the quality time was great back then. Quantity, especially with kids, is really what's going to pay off in dividends in the future.
I love the fact that, you're tying that back into your family now. You're taking some of those lessons of, yeah, don't take the shortcuts there. Like, just spend that time with them. What was it like at what point? Because during your growth, because you had so many moving parts with your company. What part was it that really maybe changed you to go a little slower with the people and take a little more time? Or where did that come from, Stephen?
I mean, and personally, my daughters were big into dance, and so there was a lot of competitions. So I made sure that, and again, this was a lot of quantity because dance competitions take a lot of time. I made sure that I was at the vast majority of them, both, the preparation for these dance competitions with them, driving them, to and from dance school, which I appreciated the countless hours of having to do that. And then as boring as it was watching other teams compete, waiting for my kids' team
Yeah.
to get up on stage. I mean, they appreciate it in spades. They still remember how mom and dad, sat there waiting for hours and hours and sometimes days for them to come up. So this is something that, they take away and it lasts a very, very long time.
Ah, I love that. And is that kind of the same thing you learned with certain people at work? Was it the same thing of just like some of the people that you were leading, you had to, take a little more time with them on certain projects?
Yeah, and definitely, I had to exhibit some patience on specific projects, but it also involved really building true relationships. I mean, there's only so much
Mm.
relationship you can build at work, from a 9 to 5 basis. And I'm not saying you can't have a great relationship only at work, but I went above and beyond to make sure that we had a lot of social events at work, so that everybody can really get to know one another as a person versus in addition to as a coworker. And one of the best compliments I've heard from one of my employees, he was actually out of London. He said, "This is the only company I've ever worked for. When I meet my coworkers, we actually hug and say hello,
Ah.
just shake hands." So that's the type of, personal relationships that were developed because of all these extracurricular activities that we had. So while at the time they cost an arm and a leg, to have company parties, to have these
Mhm.
getaways, to have these, offsite meetings, the relationships that developed were priceless and productivity
Mm.
went, through the roof.
Did you ever get any pushback like, hey, I spend so much time at work, so like I don't want to do any activities after work because the time's so tight?
There was definitely like a bell curve, right? There was a small amount of people that felt like that, and they're like, I'm here to work. I'm not here to make. I have
Yeah.
plenty of friends outside of work. I don't need to make any new friends. There's others, obviously, that went above and beyond. If they heard
Yeah.
party, if they heard there was an outing, they would
Yeah.
they would drop everything in their personal life to go attend it. But the vast majority really, really appreciated it tremendously. And there's an interesting study. I think it's called the Gallup survey or the Q12 survey. This is a measure of employee not productivity, this is a measure of employee engagement.
Hmm.
So if a company or a team or team leader wants to measure in the employee engagement, there's 12 questions. I won't bore you with all of them, but one of them is, do I have a best friend at work?
Mm.
So it's almost 10% of the actual survey. So the response to that question. So if you have a really close friend at work, your engagement with the company and your job increases.
Yeah, interesting, right? You're manufacturing software and you think it's so technical, but at the end of the day, it's not any different than manufacturing a door for a car, right? It's people. We can say that, hey, you know what? As long as we get along with work and we respect each other, that's good. But you started a manufacturing company. You sold it. You did very well. And what I heard you say is that, your profits went through the roof when the deeper relationships and you saw that correlation.
Yeah, the relationships were a huge part, and we had significantly below industry standard turnover. employees, really, really liked what they did. They were paid well. People, stay at their job because they're paid well. They're challenged, they're respected, but also because of the relationships they had. They knew that if they were leaving the company, not only were they leaving the current job, they were actually leaving a relationship that they really enjoyed. Not that they couldn't continue that relationship going forward, but it's always harder, right? It's so much
Mhm.
easier to maintain a relationship if you're working with somebody 9 to 5, and then you can do things after hours or on weekends. When you don't have that 9 to 5 glue, I'm not saying it's impossible to maintain
Yeah.
a relationship, but it becomes a little bit harder.
Yeah. It's almost like the contrast, right? Like you've got that 9 to 5, but you've got some other contrast in there
Hmm.
of that different connection. And yeah, it's life goes by quickly, right? And those you remember those relationships. So tying into this, I'll leave with my last favorite quote, which was they say it's tough to make close friends later in life. But I've disproved that. And I'm thankful for the incredible relationships I've established in my 40s and even early 50s.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard the saying, and I think it's true because I look around and I see very few people, later on in life that are making, new BFFs and
Yeah.
new, fantastic relationship. I mean, you kind of, as you get older, you kind of get set in your ways, and it's really hard to find, like-minded individuals. That typically happens, much earlier on in life. So I consider myself, super, super fortunate, and I'm, beyond wealthy in the friendship category because
Mm.
I've been able to find that. And I think if you look, there's folks out there. So
Oh,
it's just like anything else, right? The benefit to it is having relationships and having friendships, which, increase longevity. I mean, that's
mhm.
also proven, but it's work, and you're going to have to fail a couple of times, but there's great friendships to be made out there,
Yeah.
regardless of what age you're at.
So I'm going to leave the listeners with my own lesson today of I met you, Stephen, a couple of years ago. And when I heard you were from the New York area, I thought, well, I'm pretty good at building relationships. I'm going to ask you about your the sports teams. And what was your response to that?
Neither.
Yeah.
No, I either said Yankees and Giants. I think I said Yankees and Giants.
Basically, you accommodated me to be kind, right? Because you don't really that's not your now that I learned so much about you, like it just goes to show that there's amazing relationships to being built. And there's just so much interesting background from how you grew up and how you came over to New York and how you evolved with your family and how you started your company and these Ironman. And I'm asking you about sports in New York. Like I can't think of something like this guy's got so many interesting stories. So I honestly, since that day, I have changed my approach when I meet people.
Nice.
I'm so much more self-aware of like, you almost missed out on getting to know this Steven guy who's really cool and has amazing background and it's just great to be around. And you almost kind of like lost that opportunity because all you could think to ask him about was sports teams, not even about himself. So I've really
Right.
changed. So I want to thank you for that because I've kind of changed my introduction when I meet people. It's like there's better questions to ask. Everyone has greatness and everyone has such an interesting story. We all have our own stories. So my mindfulness for that part and being that openness of learning and developing relationships, I just had to tell that story.
No, I appreciate that, and thank you for sharing that. That reminds me of something I read recently, where right there's a standard opening line, right? It's either sports, weather, or whatever event you're at. That's the standard opening to when you
Yeah.
meet somebody completely new.
Yeah.
And I think the advice I read about was just start without a question, just start talking. Say, hey,
Mm.
did you watch the last episode I don't know. I don't watch that much TV. Did you watch the last episode of Lost last night? I
Yeah.
liked it because character A went to character B and said Z.
Yeah.
So make a statement about something topical and
Yeah.
start a conversation, that way, see how people respond versus the standard weather questions.
Oh man, I love that. I'm still learning, Stephen, not just to
No, we
rely on
all,
my basic sports analogies and learning more about people and just my whole mantra just being more curious. So
yeah, yeah.
that's really helped me. So how do you want to leave our listeners here? They're heading into manufacturing. What do you want to remember about you, Stephen? Or what do you want? What's helpful for them today?
Yeah, I just think from a manufacturing process, I just want everybody to understand that when you're working on something and manufacturing a component or a part, it is typically part of something significantly bigger. And the thing that's significantly bigger is going to impact an individual or a group or society in a significant way. So while it may seem insignificant in the moment, it's really part of something bigger, and people should take pride in the fact that they're actually contributing to something, significantly bigger than what's in front of their face at the moment.
I love that. And yeah, your book is being launched, Built to Finish. I got a preview of it, so I can tell listeners it's fantastic. We're going to have links in the show notes, and this episode is going to be released right around the release date of your book.
Awesome. No, I appreciate you raising awareness about the book. The book is really, yes, it's about entrepreneurship, and it's about endurance sports and intertwining the similarities between the two. But the underlying theme is really setting big goals and really getting the confidence that you can achieve big goals. There definitely is a methodology for big goals, and I hope readers read it and take something away from it. And I would love nothing more than to hear from somebody that said, hey, you know what? I always thought this goal that I had in the back of my mind was completely impossible. After reading your book, I'm going after it, and here's my progress. So I hope many people, pick up the book, go after something big that they thought previously impossible, and share the story with me. I'd love to hear these stories.
Well, it does make me think even about my own Ironman, but I'm 52 now, and I'm like, well, there's probably other things that I might want to tackle. Maybe it's not the Ironman, but it's definitely got me thinking, Steven. It's a beautiful piece of work. And I really appreciated reading it, and I'm excited to share with our listeners. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks, Trevor. I really appreciate it.
Hey, folks, appreciate you taking the time to join us today. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with someone. Haven't subscribed yet? Do it now. Remember, if you want results, the key is increasing your awareness of how you show up.